This is not a test. This is reality.
It's the weekend, and we are going beyond the strange with host Dave Cruz on Spaced Out Saturday Nights.
Dave's the killer! Yeah! Dave's the killer! Dave's a mess.
When the clocks, they never stop, they barricade my face.
You can follow Dave on Twitter at StrangeDave70. Hit him up on Skype, Strange Days 2015. And you can follow Dave on our website, spacedoutradio.com.
Things are prey. I push until I break. I feel them start to scrape. The core of all I am is chiseling away. And every speck of life is gonna rot away in time. We turn to mud or turn to stone, it's a grand design. A maze of petrified hearts and I'm lost inside. We all self-destruct, love is to deny. And that is life.
The probability is low, but the discoveries of the Kepler mission suggest that there are billions of habitable planets in our galaxy alone. And there are at least 100 billion galaxies in the visible universe. So it seems likely that there are others out there.
Now, get your tinfoil hats on tight as Spaced Out Saturday with Dave Cruz begins right now.
You're here to turn me inside out and then turn me away. For all my life I choke on clouds of savior smoke until my blackened soul was burning away. And every speck of life is gonna rot away in time. Return to mud, turn to stone, it's a grand design. A maze of petrified hearts and I'm lost inside. We all self-destruct to love is to deny.
And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Glad to be here with you all. I am Dave Cruz, your host. This is Spaced Out Saturday Night. Hola, everybody. It's good to be here tonight. Thanks, everyone, for being in the Spreaker chat and in the hashtag Spaced Out Radio and Facebook. I can see Ron is diligently in the Spreaker chat. ACOG, Catalina, Deb, Wyatt, Shar, you guys are all just hanging with us tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Kevin, thanks everyone for being here. Sandra, you guys are awesome. Thanks for being here. All right. We are live from the Napa Valley wine country, just outside the mystical Sonoma Mountains and into the Napa Valley wine country. I just said that. Okay. Let's welcome in everyone listening in on our terrestrial stations, WQEE 99 Rock the Key in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are live as well on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. You can also listen to us live on spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker.com, KTLK, The Fringe.fm, Renegade Talk Radio, The High Plains Talk Radio Network. Like our music, then rock with us to Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy, and Bumblefoot is the official sound of the mighty SOR. You can also check us out on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at StrangeDave70. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn and download our shows from iTunes. We are also on radioguy.fm, TalkStream Live, and on Stitcher. And of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. If you go to patreon.com for as low as $1 a month, you can become a patron of Spaced Out Radio. If you want to take part in the show, please sign in to one of our chat rooms on our website and on Spreaker.com, the UPRN chat room, and on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club Facebook page. Or if you're on Twitter, just go to the hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and I will get to your questions in there as well. Now, if you head over to our website for just $5 a month, you can become an SOR Space Traveler. And as of right now, you can go to Spaced Out Radio store and pick up a t-shirt, poster, or any SOR sticker that you want. We have the Encounter online that deals with everything paranormal, courtesy of our editors, Eric Markham and Everett Thiemer. And you can check out Dave Scott's latest blog there as well. If you have had an experience that you just cannot explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Tim Doyle from UFO Seekers and Leslie Mitchell Clark's Contact TV also have some great video viewing as well. And it's all good there. I also want to thank Michael McNeil, who is in the Facebook, as well as Vivian. Thank you both for joining us in the Facebook chat, as well as God of Thunder, who is diligently always on Twitter, as well as Deb. Thank you all for being here tonight. Miss Varla Ventura was introduced to the strange and unusual at a young age. Her first game was a Ouija board, and family picnics in cemeteries were common outings. She spent most of her formative years exploring graveyards, underground tunnels, and abandoned mansions in, around, and under Nevada City, California. She is the author of Shiros. I'm not sure if that's a typo or not. And a lifelong love of true oddities inspired her to write the trivia book, The Book of the Bizzare, Freaky Facts and Strange Stories. I'm sorry about that. Just kind of lost my train of thought there for a second. Varla is the author of Banshees, Werewolves, Vampires, and Other Strange Creatures of the Night, Among the Mermaids, and Book of the Bizzare and Beyond the Bizzare. She can be found often lurking around the deep, dark woods and lakes of Minnesota on the hunt for beastly things, magical herbs, and elusive little men of legend. Varla has been on radio shows such as Coast to Coast AM, Guyam TV with George Norrie. You can visit her online at www.varlaventura.net. And just to make sure I put it out there, her latest book is Fairies, Pukas, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. So everyone, please help me welcome Miss Varla Ventura. Varla, how you doing?
Hi, Dave. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
So glad that you're feeling better.
Thank you. I've been having, a vampire stole my voice, I think. So I'm better now.
They tend to do that.
They're demanding.
Yeah, they're a pain in the
keep
neck.
up with.
Sorry,
but thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm such a fan of yours, and I appreciate. For those who don't know, I have a book, a forthcoming book. In the fall of next year, and Dave has contributed a wonderful story to that book. So we've sort of been in contact over the last year quite a bit, and it's been great. I really enjoy talking with you offline. So I hope that tonight is just as exciting as our conversations we have off air. So.
Oh yeah, this is going to be great. I've been looking forward to this ever since I contacted you to come on the show, and once again, it's a pleasure to be on the radio with you again. So I'm really happy that you're here tonight.
Yeah, it's great. Great to be here. Great to be here, folks.
That's awesome.
And, on such a wonderful pre-Halloween night, we can get good and spooky and, hopefully scare a few people out there. Just a little.
Just a little. I'm really hoping that we do. Because, earlier, and I'm so glad you mentioned our offline conversations. We're doing the sound check and we're talking a little bit. And you were telling me about the stories that you've been listening on another program, which is cool. Understand. But no, it's all good.
It's just totally different. It's totally different. And your audience is probably quite familiar with the great Jim Harold. I mean, he's a pretty well-known. He's been a paranormal radio host for many years, and he has a number of shows and he's just a lovely man, really lovely host, and very, very gracious. And he just has a podcast of his campfire stories that I have been binge listening to because it's just scary story after scary story, and it's people calling in, telling their stories. And if these people are not professional storytellers, they should be, because they're just he picks the best ones, and they're just beautiful and haunting and, completely. I've been scared several times, and I can tell you that's not easy to do.
I know, right? So. But you said it scared that show scared you, and to the point where you thought maybe there might be the thing is I see it hard to scare you.
It's very hard to scare me, but
or freak you out.
Yeah, well, I was just listening to this, kind of scary story that, and it's made extra scary because it's like just folks like you and me that just call into the show and they recount their stories, and there's not a lot of questions or anything. They're just kind of allowed to tell their stories. But, it was a very dark night tonight. The sunset it seemed especially early. There were a lot of clouds. The moon was kind of completely blocked out, and it was really only a half moon anyway. And, of course, all the Halloween decorations are out, and there's a few bonfires going along by the lake in the town that I live in. And, so I'm listening to this, walking my dog, all's good. And, I frequently do this. I walk at night and listen to scary stories and freak myself out. Just, it's just a hobby. But this particular story was kind of unnerving, and I kind of just, I don't know, my dog stopped or something, and I sort of turned to look behind me. It was the first time this had ever happened where I just thought, oh, I think someone might be back there. Now, I have to just say, like all the women out there, you'll relate to this. Like, as a woman walking alone, even in a small town, on a well-lit street, you might, look over your shoulder frequently anyway. So that's not that unusual. But this was the first time that I actually kind of had a little bit of and I knew I had just, the scary stories had gotten the better of me, but I definitely varied my path, shall we say.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny, man, because I outed myself the other night when I did like a last minute show. And, I just put it out there that I like scary stuff, and I do like when I can watch a movie where a werewolf is tearing into somebody, or, vampires, sucking someone's blood, or, that kind of gory stuff. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with stuff popping out at me.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny. I just read an article today. I think it was in like Time magazine or something. And it was about how being scared is actually can be like watching a horror movie can be good for your health. Sure. And first they sort of cite how many calories you burn by basically kind of constantly being on the edge of your seat and maybe moving a little more than you would if you're watching, say, like, you know, a romantic comedy and you're sort of lounging about, right? The horror movie is like you're tensed. And so you're tensing your muscles the whole time. So they said something like, you know, you can burn watching The Shining, you can burn as many calories as, you know, a 140-pound adult walking for 45 minutes or something like that. And I was, that's hilarious. And then they go on to just talk about how it can improve your blood circulation and that stimulates your brain. And, you know, it was great. It was just this great, you know, very kind of Time magazine kind of, you know, official article about why watching horror movies is actually good for your health. I'll post it on my Facebook page later so everyone can check that out, because it was, I mean, I was reading it on my phone or something, so I have to find the link, but it was really great, and it made me feel like, yeah, that's it. Now it's good for me. So now, you know, in addition to all the other reasons we like to be scared, but there are some, you know, biological reasons that you can now justify curling up and watching, you know, Saw 4 or whatever you're going to watch.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my wife, Deb, loves all the scary stuff. And she calls me a chicken, you know, and it's okay. I sometimes I can be, but the truth is I do like scary stuff. And the funny thing is when it's real stuff, like say you go on an investigation, I don't have a problem with that. It's weird because now I'm really talking to ghosts, or I'm getting into that realm, in, you know, for real. And for some reason that doesn't scare me. I don't know if you felt the same, but I mean, I can go through like one of those fake haunted houses and be like, yeah, whatever. You know, it's not scary to me. Well,
I think, I mean, I think there's something that has happened to me, at least in my personal paranormal experiences, where I have had either, you know, I've seen a ghost, or a ghost has touched me or said something to me, or, you know, whatever. Those kind of experiences where you feel something pressing down at the foot of the bed, to me, those kind of experiences, when you're in them and you're in the moment, they don't necessarily seem, I mean, there are plenty of terrifying experiences out there, and I'm not discounting, but for me, a lot of times those experiences I know they're called supernatural, but sometimes the natural part really comes into play, where it's very matter of fact. It's like, okay, this is happening right now. Or maybe you're not quite, you know, accepting that it is happening, or you're just sort of processing it in this very kind of matter of fact way. And for me, I've only had like maybe one kind of ghostly encounter that scared me a little bit, but it didn't really scare me until after it had happened. And it was I felt something sitting down on the edge of my bed, and I was home alone, and I was, you know, in my own apartment, and, you know, it was whatever, 2 a.m, and I felt something sit on the base of my bed, and I thought, oh, my cat. And then my next thought was, oh, I don't have a cat, because I didn't have a cat at the time. And so I kind of sat up, and I was like, okay, just, you know, relax. You just must have been dreaming. And I fell back asleep. And then it happened again. Like the moment I was kind of drifting off. And so then I sat like bolt upright, and I was like, okay, this is, I definitely felt that. I can't explain that away, but it still was just like hadn't really freaked me out too much. And then I asked, well, what can I do? I'm either going to get up and put on all the lights and play some music or something, or I'm going to just go back to sleep. So I tried to go back to sleep. It happened a third time. Then I got up and turned on all the lights. And it didn't, in that moment, it wasn't as scary until kind of after I had dealt with it. And once I had dealt with it and had sort of like, you know, opened the window, and, you know, back then I smoked. So I was like, I'll just smoke a cigarette. I just sort of like started engaging in life again. And then I started thinking about it. And then I started getting scared and retelling the story the next day to someone. I was kind of like, yeah, you know, that does sound a little freaky. But in that moment, I wasn't as scared in the moment as it's almost like we talk about ghost stories and we tell ghost stories and they're scarier and we want to hear other people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
But many of us will find that in that moment, maybe it's just going into survival mode, but you're just like, okay, this is very, this actually makes kind of, if you give up on trying to make sense of it, it makes sense. And I do think that that's what happens when children see ghosts. I think that they don't have the ability to like completely think of it as something wrong or something unusual. They sort of are like, okay, so you'll hear these stories about a kid saying to their parent, well, is that who the man in my room is? And the parent is just like, what are you talking about? Not to say that kids don't get scared of these things and some things may be more menacing, but I think we find that we, I guess, psych ourselves up for the scare factor, but that many of us will find when we're in that moment, if we're in an investigation or we're, having that experience. I mean, for many of us, it's quite an incredible and mystical experience. And so it has sort of a different, time signature than regular everyday stuff like, making yourself a cup of coffee or whatever.
Yeah. And I just want to remind folks real quick in the chat rooms, if you want to get a question to Varla and you want to ask me, please put your questions in caps. That way Deb can read, get the question to me quicker, and then I'll get it right to Varla. And it's just a lot easier that way, folks. So I really appreciate that, especially since we have a lot of material to cover tonight. We've got a lot of stuff to go over, and I greatly appreciate it. Space travelers are awesome. They're just the greatest bunch of listeners and audience that Spaced Out Radio has. That's all I can say.
Fun, yeah.
So let's go back a little bit, Varla. Let's talk a little bit about how you got into all this. Talk a little bit, some of your bio, you talked about, some interesting things that you grew up around and was normal in your family. So I'm assuming your family believed in this as well, as far as maybe ghosts and other, things that bump in the night, right?
Yeah, I mean, mostly my mom was very interested in the occult. And so I grew up in a house where on the bookshelf, there were books by Dion Fortune and, books by Aleister Crowley and different kinds of books on spells and witchcraft, along with things like The Magic of Findhorn, about this incredible community in Scotland that kind of communed with fairies and elementals and were able to have this lovely commune with gorgeous vegetables. And so things kind of that spectrum, reading tarot cards. I mean, I learned to read tarot cards at a very young age. In fact, my mom plays, she can read a regular deck. And so she sort of taught me a little bit how to read a regular deck as you would a tarot deck. So those are the kind of things, that were at a base influence, just sort of like right at my eye level. I mean, those things were not off limits. And I'm not saying that I was exposed to inappropriate material at a young age. Perhaps I was. I mean, hey, I am who I am. But and also I had older siblings, older sisters especially, that liked horror fiction. So there was a lot of, I'd go to my grandma's house in the summer and spend all summer there, and there would be all the cousins and older sisters and stuff would leave their books behind, and that's how I first started reading some of the short stories by Alfred Hitchcock. There were a few publications in the 70s, I think, that came out with like collections of Alfred Hitchcock stories. And then there were also, there was all the Stephen King short stories and things like that, and old comics and Tales from the Crypt and good fun stuff like that. So
you definitely you liked reading.
I was a young reader, and I was an avid reader. And in fact, part of how I kind of got interested in like fairy tales and things like that, like many children, reading fairy tales. But when I was about just not quite 7 years old, we moved from the San Francisco Bay Area up to the woods outside of Nevada City. And it was a very rural environment. My parents are still completely off the grid. We didn't have running water. We had the shell of a house. We had to draw water from an old well down at the bottom of the hill. I mean, it was very like scullery maid kind of fairy tale scenario that you could imagine. And prior to actually moving onto that land, we lived beside a creek and a campground for a few months. So I went from sort of playing on the sidewalk and roller skating as a little girl in the Bay Area to, like meandering through the woods. And that actually had a wonderful influence on me because my mom also had a lot of knowledge about herbs and plants and things like that. And so it would just kind of come up naturally. And she was interested in those things. So she would ask questions and learn things and, kind of taught me about fairy mounds and things to, we had this old apple orchard on my parents' property and sort of like the magical properties of apples and how they're associated with certain goddesses like Aphrodite. And so she would just kind of tell us these things as we would be walking around. And, when you're little, you absorb them. And key to all of this, we didn't have a television. And we actually communicated through CB radio for the first couple of years. So I do think that, really influenced a lot of my kind of imagination forming and being drawn to stories and writing and reading about these kinds of things.
So was the purpose of all this moving from a huge city like, San Francisco, the Bay Area, and then going to some place rural? Like, 'cause I know both places. I'm a technician, by trade, and I've always been on the road. So I've been from, all the way from Irvine, Southern Cal, all the way up to Eureka and beyond that. And of course into Nevada. So I know where all these places are, and Nevada City is woods. I mean, it's just woods. Out there in the Auburn area and Grass Valley, all those places, right?
Yeah, right next door.
Yeah, amazing. Wonderful scenery when you're going through all that. Because all I'm thinking when you're talking about that is Little House on the Prairie, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. So we actually sort of, my sister and I, we kind of fancied ourselves. I mean, that was very relatable to us. Some of those scenarios. Of course, as time evolved and my parents finished their house and they hooked up a generator and they have solar, and I mean they kind of went off grid, not because it was like the cool environmentally conscious thing to do. They were just like totally burnt out and they were tired of raising their kids in an urban environment. My mom had grown up in San Francisco and has incredible stories about being a child in the in the late 40s and 1950s and wandering through the San Bruno Mountains and finding these old mansions that had been kind of overgrown. And, it was before that San Bruno Mountains were all woods. I mean, they were really all woods probably when you and I were kids. Now there's a lot of houses up there. But I think, I don't know. I guess I kind of understand where my parents were coming from to make a move like that. But, it takes a certain type to really go that rural. I mean, you really have to deal with a lot of the amenities that you don't have today. For example, really fast internet. So there's a lot of limitations to it, right?
Right.
But you do, shut everything down at night and you can see all the stars and you can hear the hoots and howls in the woods. And so there's a great deal of, value in that. For children and actually just humans in general. More, I don't know. I was once told that if you want to enhance any of your psychic abilities or your ability to really communicate with something other than your own self and your phone, that you should actually just go put yourself off grid for at least a week. And that includes, now at the time, the person who told me, this was before everyone had cell phones. So I'll date myself a little bit, but we all had landlines and we had answering machines. And I think I even had a pager for a while. And he said, just don't read the paper, don't watch television, don't answer your phone for just 1 week and really just kind of like practice listening to your observations. And as you get better at observing things, you'll start to trust your kind of, psychic premonitions and things like that. And a lot of people that I know in the psychic arts do that. They give themselves sort of a mental break. They need to give themselves a mental break, especially in this kind of constant day and age. But one thing that's real common up in that rural part, especially of Northern California, there are UFO sightings. Quite a few.
Mount
and
Shasta.
I had a number of people. I remember my sister once went camping with a group of friends, and they had a shared kind of very strange encounter. So there's quite a few things like that kind of go along with places that are a little more remote.
Pretty cool. So most of your childhood was in this area. When did you decide to move back to the bigger parts of, California or?
As soon as I could drive, I basically moved to the city.
Were you bored or?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was. Well, you have to understand that Nevada City, with a population of at the time 3,000 people, that was town, Dave. That was like going somewhere. So as soon as I could drive, I was in town all the time, and as soon as I could, as soon as I was 18, I moved to a city. And I wasn't the Bay Area, but I did move back to the Bay Area shortly thereafter and lived there for the last 25 years until just a couple years ago when I made a mass exodus.
That's cool. I just got a message from Mark Eddy. He says he's loving the show.
I love Mark. Hi, Mark.
He's enjoying the show, but unfortunately he's passing out at the same time. He's fighting his eyes.
Yes.
But,
I think he's on East Coast time even. So for him, it's past midnight.
Oh, yeah. He's way over there. And, he loves listening to you. And I wanted to pass that message on, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I love Mark. He's wonderful.
Great guy. Great friend. I love Mark, too. So I tell Deb all the time that I really wish we can, one of these days, it's either we're going to grow old on the beach in Mexico sipping margaritas.
Ooh, I like that scenario. Mm-hmm.
Or drinking Coronas, or I would like to actually do the same scenario your parents did and buy, a crazy amount of acreage of land and just, start from there and, do that. And part of that scenario is maybe a little bit of going off the grid and not being around everything right now. That's just, driving everyone crazy. But, I've always wanted to just be out in the country. That's one of my dreams. And the woods seems mysterious. They always seem like there's always something about the woods and a lot of stories and in a lot of texts and books, even in like religious books. I know, like in the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith went into a grove, and that's where he supposedly, allegedly, whatever you want to call it, had talked to God and Jesus or his son or whatever, and these angelic beings, and that's how he started, the whole Mormon religion, and so that's one thing, and there's also. And then to take it to a different contrast, I had heard that there was a lot going on just recently with demonic clowns being seen in the woods.
I don't know what I would do. I mean, like I said, I'm not that easily scared. I think what would scare me is to see one kind of completely out of context, but nobody likes clowns. I mean, maybe it was really just like some kind of weird publicity stunt for it, and no one will ever admit to that. But I think
believe that
a lot of the stories that you find about kind of banshees and werewolves and vampires and other sort of like fairy creatures that are encountered usually in the woods or in some kind of always in some sort of natural scenario, with the exception of maybe more of the modern tales that we have of vampires where they can be much more urban. But you have a combination, and it's interesting when you're looking through all the old folklore, which is something that I'm kind of constantly doing, is that you can kind of tell when somebody has had lived somewhere all their life and they have a story, and then there's somebody who's in unfamiliar territory and they can't always identify a sound or something that sounds like a woman screaming, or that was actually like a big cat or something like that. I think it's funny you mentioned there's like a scene in Little House where they hear this scream and it sounds like a woman screaming, and it sounds like the description that people give of banshees, and it's in fact like a panther or something like that, some sort of big cat that was, still roaming around back then.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting when you're reading through those things, and a lot of times when you hear a story or someone's telling you a story, and for me, the most interesting and often sometimes the scariest stories are when it's someone that you know personally, and they're telling you something, and they're a very sane, rational person, or that they have experience. Like I have a friend that lives still up in the kind of Nevada County area, and he told me this story, and he lives like right next door to hit the property he grew up on. And he told me the story about this sound he heard that just totally sends chills up my spine. It was this kind of bizarre moan that shook the woods. And it's in, I put that, I don't want to totally give it away, but I included that story also in the book that you're in as well. And to me, here's somebody with all of this experience who's like literally walked those woods since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Every day of his life, he knows every sound around there. And this was something incredibly foreign. And the way he described it was almost like it was synthesized. And there were a lot of details to it that just really kind of made it sound very, very supernatural. Sort of a low moan that traveled up the valley and shook the little cabin that he was in. And of course he tells me this when I'm actually at that cabin.
Nice.
So like put the lights on, just a couple lights. But yeah, it was, when you hear these kind of stories, you always have to think about I guess sort of like the provenance of where they came from and who's telling them and what's their experience in that area. And so many of the recorded stories from oral traditions, it's impossible to tell how much of that is the writer's own sort of liberties that they take, which is why something like anthropology is so valuable, because people are at least recording stories as they're told word for word and not putting their own kind of spin on them.
I have one coming on the show next week, as a matter of fact. I don't want to give it away for everybody, but I'll mention it at the end of the show. Anthropologist, that is.
Oh,
but
cool.
But yeah, no, that's right. That's cool. You want to get that, make sure that you can kind of have an idea of what's going on, and that would freak me out, man, if I was out there and I heard something like that. And this kind of ties in with something that one of our listeners in the Spreaker chat, Catalina, hey Catalina, wants to ask: does Varla have any cryptic stories like Bigfoot?
So Bigfoot is kind of a creature that I haven't spent a lot of time researching. I feel I've never felt particularly compelled by Bigfoot in particular as far as cryptids go. And I also think that's, there are certain people that are like really into Bigfoot and do a lot of, much more extensive research than I have. However, and in sort of the cryptid realm, definitely a lot of stories like there are some crossovers between something that would be considered a cryptid and maybe something that would be considered a werewolf or a dog man. And then you're kind of getting into Bigfoot territory. And I have a few stories in like one of my books, Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, which is, you can kind of guess what that's about. Mm-hmm. And the section on werewolves, I do kind of delve into that a little bit. And even in the fairy book, I talk about some things, pukas, for example, which are kind of fairy tricksters and shapeshifters and can appear as animals most often, horses, rabbits, occasionally eagles. As I was kind of researching those, I came into, a lot of the sort of like hellhounds and guardian dogs and things like that. And to me, those, I don't know if I even really where I would classify those magical creatures, cryptids. I mean, I kind of think they're all sort of the same greater umbrella of like, we don't know what they are. But I have been very fascinated, especially of late, by some of the kind of part animal, werewolfy dog kind of things that I've been hearing about. And I've actually, this kind of thing I'm sure happens with you a lot, Dave, like you put something out there, right? So like I wrote this book about banshees and werewolves, and then you go on and you talk about it, and then people kind of call in or they write to you and they say, well, I had this experience, or I want to share this experience that I had about that kind of encounter. And that has happened a few times with werewolf stuff and fairies as well. People don't always like to admit that they have had like a fairy encounter, but there's a huge realm of fairy. Like fairy is kind of an umbrella term for a whole bunch of different creatures. And a lot of people will say, well, actually, I think I might have had some kind of goblin or brownie in my house or something like that.
That's interesting. And a little bit about the fairies too. I've seen the range of fairies, like as far as what they look like, all the way from like Tinkerbell, from Peter Pan, all the way to like a full humanoid size person. Like us.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think kind of the approach that I took with the book is that I'm not really, we have this association with this sort of gossamer winged kind of lovely little thing flitting about the garden. And that's not really the realm of the fairy. Mm-hmm. And traditionally people actually feared and revered fairies and, left offerings for them or tried to avoid them, or tried to get in good with them, or avoided certain places at night, that you shouldn't walk because you might get swept up by the puka. And so which by the way, the puka is like the perfect excuse if you've ever been out late drinking. They actually do tend to kind of prey on drunks, and they like people who don't have a lot of credibility in their community, because they like to sort of sweep you away on some kind of terrifying ride. They don't actually bring much harm. Often, as I said, they're in the shape of like a horse or sometimes a rabbit or another animal. But most of the stories that I've read there, it's usually a horse, and you kind of are taken on this terrifying midnight ride, and then you wake up hours later in this ditch. And so people will say, well, don't go down that road. That's where the Kildare puka is always seen. Things of that nature. And it's kind of this sort of trickster element where they sort of prey on people who are less likely to be believed, because it kind of, just sort of messes with the dynamics and kind of teaches a lesson without being too, like overt about it or trying to be too preachy about it. It's just like, well, maybe you should reevaluate what path you take. You can take that as a metaphor or take it as literally, don't take that road past 10 o'clock. People don't walk down that road, and here's why. So you have kind of the wonderful world of cautionary tales with fairy tales that can be incredibly dark.
When you write these books, Varla, what are you looking for as far as information and material? Because when I go through your books and I read some of the stuff, some things look almost like poems, and then others look just like maybe facts or things that you pick up. I like the way it's read. I mean, the way it's written, by the way, and it's really cool. And you can kind of go back. It's like a reference book as well. And I'm not sure if that was the intention or not.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely bathroom reader. Is that what you're implying? No.
Well,
the first couple of books, the books of the Bizzare, which are collections of freaky stories and facts and kind of unusual things around the world. Those definitely have that kind of Ripley's Believe It or Not meets, every day is Halloween kind of vibe. And that's actually the kind of books that I devoured as a young person. And so at some point it occurred to me that I could actually write a book that I would enjoy reading. That actually was a revelation for me. Well, I would like to write about something that I want to read. And then that format sort of evolved with the same. I've just been working with the same publisher for years, and that format evolved with a collection of people's stories, facts, and then with the supernatural and magical creatures, I've excerpted from some beautiful old stories, because there's nothing like an old Irish folk tale about a leprechaun to really kind of illustrate your point. But as far as source material, I have a huge, you'd be shocked to learn that I have a great many books. In fact, when I moved across the country, I had so many boxes of books that I didn't have anywhere to put them. I mean, I had like 50 boxes brimming with books. So, and since then I've amassed probably, 10 more boxes worth. And they're just a variety of, I have some very old volumes. I like to call them volumes of forgotten lore, early fairy tales, early collections of fairy and folklore. And a lot of those books are like, they refer to each other. They'll refer to the other authors in the introduction. And so it's kind of like, what do they get? Like an Easter egg, right? Where you find it and then you follow that to the next one and you sort of follow this series of clues. And then, so that's kind of where I get like a lot of the core of what I start with. And then another place that I really like to look at is this wonderful resource. It's called Gutenberg, the Gutenberg Library. And it's an online collection of things in the public domain. I mean, I'll say that they try very hard to make sure that the things that go in there are in the public domain, and they're mostly old books that have been scanned. And unlike something like Google Books, which says Google Books all over it, and you can't really like necessarily download it or whatever, these are, you can download it, to your desktop. You can put it right onto your little tablet or whatever if you want to read it. But they're like facsimiles of the original, so they're actually scanned documents. So they'll have illustrations in them and they'll have the original copyright page. And I only say that because just because they're in there, it doesn't mean you can just sort of freely take them and distribute them widely, because, occasionally things go in there that aren't, that might be still copyright protected. But nonetheless, it's a really fun, it's like a search engine of a library where you can type in something like fairy and see what comes up. And what I like to do is find things there and then go and find maybe like a version of that, possibly a more modern version where someone has written their interpretation. Or if I'm really lucky, I actually just recently found a whole collection of ghost stories by Elliot O'Donnell. And Elliot O'Donnell is someone that I reference in my Banshee book, because he wrote a lot about banshees, and he was this wonderful Irish ghost hunter who was also an author during sort of the late 1800s. And he's very interesting because he wrote about werewolves, he wrote about banshees, and he wrote about the fairy kingdom. He also was a sort of a ghost hunter, and he had the unique, many people who were collecting these stories at the time had a bit of cynicism to their collections and would sort of they kind of had their own agenda, but he was a believer, and that was actually surprisingly rare back then. You had people who were collecting stories, but he had a number of supernatural experiences, paranormal experiences when he was a young boy, and growing up in Ireland. So that sort of led him down that path, and so his work is really wonderful. And I just recently found an actual physical collection of ghost stories that I had read online, nothing that's in any of the books, but I was, and it was old. I mean, it was from, probably published in the turn of the 20th century. So it was very exciting.
That's really cool. I remember you talking about the Gutenberg back when we talked on my show. That's great that you have all the information. And by the way, I did not mean anything about bathroom book or anything like that.
Oh, no. It's fine. Hey,
definitely belongs on a coffee table or on your bookshelf. So please.
Look, all of the books that I've written can be read. If you read them beginning to end, you will get something maybe a little bit more out of them, but they're not really designed to be read that way. I mean, you can read them back to front. You can read, there's a lot of little snippets and things in there. And I like to read like that. I like something that is restful to my eye and visually pleasing. So I break things up. So you might have this like really intense. And also if I include an old story in an old dialect, it just can be exhausting to read something like that. So it's fun to throw like a quote or a joke or a poem or something in there to kind of counteract that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And by the way, we are getting, some more questions from the Spreaker chat and also in the Facebook chat with Michael's in there, and he wants to know, you know what, I'm going to save that for the next segment. Because
tune in.
Because we're coming up on a break in about 4 minutes. So I'm going to get to this question really quick. And can you tell us a little bit about hellhounds in like the next 3 minutes?
Oh, sure. Yeah, hellhounds. I love hellhounds. Well, hellhounds, the way that I sort of, I had heard the term hellhound, of course. I mean, you grow up reading horror and you're going to hear about hellhounds. But I've come to find some examples of some of the things that are equivalent to a hellhound. So just in a nutshell, like a hellhound is basically a supernatural hound, a dog. We have many examples of these in even like semi-modern classic fairy tales where you have a dog guarding a treasure. One has eyes the size of saucers. I think that's the tinderbox. One has eyes the size of dinner plates. And they're sort of guarding something, but they're also thought to have been sort of in the same way a banshee can be a portent of death or disease. They also appear as an omen, so they're sort of kind of letting you know that they might, that you might die, or seeing them will bring you some ill luck. But that being said, just as with the banshee, rather than always causing you direct harm, they are often in some views, they can be a bit more like a psychopomp where they might guide you into your death. So I know that kind of sounds like they cause your death, but it's a little different than that. And for in some examples, I found hellhounds with a real close crossover to something that, in fact, in the book, I included them in the puka section because there was some stories about hellhounds that fit so much the description of a puka in terms of carrying you off and taking you on this wild ride, but actually appearing in the form of a large dog, generally a black dog. I think there's in the, Greek mythology that, there's this huge dog that guards Hades, and that's a big black hellhound. So they kind of guard like portals and holes and passages to the afterlife or to the other world. And it's interesting because I recently interviewed a woman who lives in Alaska and does a lot of paranormal research up there. And I won't reveal everything about the interview, but she actually talks a little bit about these dogs that would frequently appear, are black dogs that appear in the place of mines and sort of guarding gold and things like that. So that's my Hellhound Redux. There's a lot more to say about them. But
oh yeah, no, we definitely can get into some more of that, and in the rest of the show. It's just we're coming up on that break, so we are going to be going to a break here in a few seconds. I just want to let people know that in the chat room and in Facebook and stuff, we will get to your questions. And yes, Char, we are going to get into some stories. I'm sure Varla has tons of stories she'd love to share with you. So, Char, don't worry. We got you covered. This is Spaced Out Radio Saturday night, Halloween edition with Varla Ventura. So, everyone don't go away. We'll be right back right after this.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at ufoseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
From coast to coast to coast, Blacklight Uncharted is taking on the paranormal across Canada. From ghostly hauntings to the UFOs flying above in conjunction with MUFON Canada, we're closely investigating what's going on in the northern skies and checking out the apparitions that walk among us. Check out our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to know your thoughts, we want to hear your experiences, and we want you to share your stories. The answers are out there, and we intend to find them.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spacedoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spacedoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over the Spaced Out Radio night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, this is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from Your 4 Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report and let's find out the answers together.
Psychic Sundays, spiritual communication, ET contact, Sasquatch in your backyard, we will have it all on Cosmic Passport with me, Elizabeth Anglin. Each Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, at spacedoutradio.com, I will take you on a journey of enlightenment. The goal is learning from the soul on out. We'd love it if you joined our experience. Cosmic Passport, heard Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest, from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
Looking for nighttime adventure? Old school radio that delves into everything out of the norm? Then check us out at Spaced Out Radio. This is Dave Scott. Every Monday through Friday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we're going to take you on a wild ride ranging from conspiracies to true crime and every ghost, alien, and Sasquatch story in between. We're always live, and we're always interactive with you. So join us at spacedoutradio.com, where together, we own the night.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guests and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Cruz and SOR.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to Spaced Out Saturday Nights with me, Dave Cruz. Tomorrow night, Elizabeth Anglin has Psychic Sundays on Spaced Out Sundays Cosmic Passport, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. You can also listen to me, Dave Cruz, as I host Beyond the Strange Radio Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can go to the spacedoutradio.com website /paranormal and click on the Beyond the Strange button for links and info to the show. We want to welcome back everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are also live on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. We are live on TalkStream Live, iHeartRadio, and KTLK, thefringe.fm as well. Find us on TuneIn and iTunes for download. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. Head on over to the website for some great features from videos from UFO Seekers and Contact TV. Shop at a store, pick up some t-shirts, posters, and stickers, and don't forget to rock out to our resident guitar god, Ron Bumblefoot THAL, who is the official music of Spaced Out Radio. Once again, I'd like to thank our guests for being with us tonight, Miss Varla Ventura. Thank you so much, Varla, for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you know what? Earlier when I was reading your bio, something occurred to me. I don't know if I messed up on that first writing that you did, but it says here Shiros. Is that correct?
Yes. But I don't really, I don't even know if that book's in print anymore.
Okay. But it just sounds interesting. It sounds like it might have been like a comic book or something.
It's about like amazing women.
Yeah. Okay.
That are, female heroines. And I'm not sure. I'm sure it's available on Amazon still. I'm not sure if it's still in print. So it's probably available, used, which is fine. I know people want to hear stories and I'm excited to tell them, but I would love if I could just take one quick minute and give a shout out to someone.
Sure.
And that is the designer of the last 3 books that I worked on: Fairies, Spookles, and Changelings, The Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, and Among the Mermaids. And Among the Mermaids especially, the designer of those books. He did the covers, he found all of the art, he did all of the layout, and he did an incredible job. And sadly, he passed away somewhat suddenly and unexpectedly just about a week ago.
Oh my.
His name is Jim Warner. And he was a wonderful man and, very, very known in the Bay Area, especially known for he had worked for HarperCollins for years and for his book design, and an incredible artist. And he did many little things with the design. He managed the interior design of the book, and he created all the covers, including, the little picture on the spine that he put on my last book. And I actually just wanted to give kind of a general shout out to him that even if you don't buy the book, any of these last 3 books, if you're ever in a store and you get a chance to see them and hold them and sort of admire the composition of them, I hope that you would do that and think of Jim Warner.
Yeah, I mean, the artwork on this, the illustrations are just phenomenal. They look vintage.
Oh, yeah, he was like just amazing at finding old found art and sort of tweaking it, and he always just found the perfect. In fact, every one of these last 3 books, the image that was the first image that he found that became the covers of the books. I mean, it was like he just got it, and he was just a wonderful communicator and a wonderful artist, and he just really, the world will miss him.
Sadly, yeah, they will, and that is a great loss, and I have to make this comment on the Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires book. Every time I pick that book up, I see the cover with I think it's a werewolf. And
Isn't that, oh my, of that sort of like bearded woman,
right?
That looks, yes.
But
I
it's
don't
cute.
even know where he found that. It's cute and it's folkish, and yet it's also some sort of werewolf with beautiful flowers coming out. He didn't. That I don't know how he found that. He never really revealed his sources. He was a true professional.
Very cool.
When I saw, I know that I was sort of flooded with emotion when I saw the mermaid cover, but when I saw the Banshee cover, I think I probably screamed like a banshee with excitement because it was just such a perfect image.
Yeah, it is. I'm just like, that is so cool because it almost looks innocent, but at the same time, if you're not careful, you'll get torn to shreds or something.
Yeah. At the same time, something is not quite right there. It's like they've tried to domesticate a werewolf or something. It's like dress it up and bring it into church and see what happens.
Oh yeah, that would be an interesting sight. All right, so we're gonna get into some stories, right? And
sure.
Michael from the Facebook, he wanted to ask you. We'll start off with this kicker. What is your scariest story ever?
Oh, that's a good. Okay, so let me think of what happened. I'm assuming he means of something that happened to me personally, not like the scariest story I've ever read or been told.
It's kind of, maybe it's vague on purpose, but it just says, what is Varla's scariest story?
Because I think in terms of folklore and the stories that I've read and the creatures that I've read about, and while banshees, things like banshees and hellhounds can sound very terrifying because they seem to sort of, indicate death or, the death of someone that you love, probably the scariest idea is the concept of the changeling, which is basically, kidnapping a little baby and leaving a fairy in its place and taking the baby back to the fairy kingdom. So it's a fairy switch. And that is that's a kind of a terrifying concept for a lot of reasons. And when you're reading these old stories, some of the gruesome remedies for sort of making sure that your child is a child, or making sure that the fairies don't get in are I was I don't want to say I was shocked, but I was quite surprised by the level of, for example, in the book I have this passage by William Butler Yeats describing changeling and the changeling remedy, and it's very it strikes of medieval torture. I'll just say that. I don't really want to get into the gory details because I've actually done that and gotten my radio hosts in trouble before. So we won't do that. So if people want to know more about that, they can message me offline, or better yet, get the book. But I think as far as what a scary story that's happened to me personally, I've had a number of paranormal encounters over the years, many of which did not scare me. Although if I were anticipating another paranormal encounter like one of these, I might get a little more scared. But probably one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me took place in the basement of an old Victorian and involved, of course, a Ouija board. And I was a teenager, and I think there's something about teenage energy that, like, poltergeists and swirling energies teenagers just sort of exude angst and strange energy and exuberance and, a kind of vitality as they're growing into their the people that they will be. And so I do think that certain paranormal activity can be drawn to that. And we've seen many times in stories that poltergeist will attach itself to like an adolescent or a person who is a teenager. So for me, I was probably 16 or so, because I know I could drive because I drove to this house. And I was, hanging out with some people, and this one, my boyfriend and I at the time went down into the basement, which was a basement of a Victorian that was 150 years old, and it was, a little damp, and it was just, there were creepy corners that had never been swept out and things like that. And we decided, why we decided to do this, I guess I know. We're fascinated by it, but I don't think it was my Ouija board, because actually I'd had a Ouija experience when I was a kid, and my mom got rid of the board. And that wasn't particularly scary, but my sister and I started talking with this spirit who said that they were this little girl named Elise. And as it turned out, near my parents' property, on the adjoining property, there was a lone grave of a little girl who had died at like the age of 8 back in, pioneer gold rush times. And she was buried on this property. And so we were talking with Elise, and when we told our mom, we're talking with Elise on the board, which my mom had given us for Christmas, she sort of promptly, picked up the board and closed it up and put it away. And who knows, I'm not entirely sure what she did with it. She might have burned it, I don't know. And it wasn't that she was worried that we were communicating with something. It was that she wasn't entirely convinced that it was actually this ghost of this little girl. She thought it might be something that could have been lurking behind it. She realized very quickly that as young children, we didn't have the ability to, sort of protect ourselves or close any door. I think she didn't think anything was going to happen. And then stuff started happening, just in terms of the, on the board, things started happening. So anyway, this wasn't my board, and I was in the basement of this Victorian, and we started doing stuff, with the planchette where you put your hands on. And for me, I've always found with the Ouija board, whenever I've used it, I've always felt a little bit like a cheater, because oftentimes whatever answer I think is going to happen is the answer that's spelled out, even though I know I'm not physically pushing it. And I'm not saying that I'm, pushing it with my mind, but I do think there's a form of mentalism there where, two people are maybe thinking the same answer. Well, in this case, the planchette got, kind of started out very slowly, as it often does. And then it sort of started working itself into this fever at identifying itself as a male ghost that had lived in the house. And I've kind of forgotten all of the exact details of what this thing was telling us. And we were so engrossed in it at a certain point, I did not realize, but my boyfriend had completely taken his fingers off, and my fingers were very touching lightly. And so then there was just this moment in which I was alone communicating with this ghost, and it got very dark. It got, I don't mean the room got dark, but the conversation got dark. It got sort of lewd, and it got, I don't know what was happening exactly that, was making this happen. I don't know if there were crazy thoughts coming from my boyfriend. I highly doubt that. But whatever I had tapped into was, I just had this very strong feeling of danger. And so I stopped. And for just a moment, it kept moving. And when that happened, I think what was so scary about that moment was not that that this had all happened, because come on, you're 16 years old and you're in an old Victorian basement and you're playing with a Ouija board. What did you think was going to happen? It wasn't going to be like lollipops and sunshine. But it was the look on he was so terrified in that moment. And he was looking at something over to me, it was just this moment of he's looking at something behind me. He's not looking at me. And he just said, "We need to get out of here." Mm-hmm. And then I went to get the board. He says, "Leave the board." And we all of a sudden we just had that moment of running up the basement stairs, and it had there's just sort of this menacing thing. And actually after that, many people who were living in that house, because it was this old Victorian that had been divided up into apartments, kind of a lot of the older teenagers, young adults would sort of circulate throughout town. They would end up living in this house. And there were just a few kind of, weird things that seemed to increase after that. And slowly word got around that we had this experience, which really was, for all that entire time, there was probably only 5 seconds of pure terror. But there was something about the sort of lecherousness and lewdness and the way that my boyfriend was looking past me to something that appeared to be on the wall, and I pressed him for more details, and he did kind of give me the indication that there was something there, and he saw something kind of coming out of the wall, and then, we just shut it down. Oh my God. And, we never went down there again, but he still lived there. And so we often, the door to the basement was off the dining room, of course. Mm-hmm. So you always had to walk through that room to get to the kitchen, to get to his room, to get to upstairs where other people lived. It was, the door to the basement was closed and no one lived down there, but it was just sort of this, kind of, what would happen if, and you always had that little bit of that curiosity, but also so scared that it was just not, not worth investigating any further. And I have always actually wanted to go back as a kind of more knowledgeable adult and go back to that house and, have a team of professionals there, maybe check for EVPs, and also just ask, the current residents, have you ever had any experiences? What do you think of the basement? But that's probably the scariest kind of supernatural thing that's ever happened to me. I've been told way scarier stories, things that, I had kind of indicated, people that I know and love and trust and are, very strong and very brave people that, were reduced to, being really, really scared. And so those kind of stories actually scare me more when someone that I think of as a protector or a, really strong person tells me a story in which they were scared. But that was probably one of the only times that I just knew I had gone too far, because I'd always been, as I said at the beginning of the show, these were not unusual things for me to kind of deal in the paranormal arts. And I think in retrospect, I think it was just a little bit of whatever it was just an awakening of not being reckless and foolish with those kinds of things, and recognizing that there is some kind of power there, and to not, be a stupid young girl and mess around in a basement with some kind of, solo with some kind of entity, just to be a little more responsible about my choices.
I was listening to that, man, and I'm just like, that would definitely be a place for a paranormal team to come in and do an investigation, especially if your boyfriend at the time thought he saw something coming out of the wall and couldn't really tell you at the same time. It's almost like you're seeing something, but you're not really seeing something, if that makes sense. Like it's a sixth sense type of thing, or whatever.
And sometimes you're so hyper aware in those situations, and your adrenaline's rushing, that as soon as you get it's like you come up for air, and you immediately start doubting everything that just happened. You kind of redux it with each other, and then as time passes, you kind of, I don't know, you can kind of explain it away. And we don't talk that much anymore, but he and I also had a shared kind of weird, I guess it was a UFO experience, because we did not know what it was, and it was a very odd experience. And so, once in a while we'll talk, and we don't really talk about that too much, because I think it just kind of shook us both on another level, where it was like, and we're done with that. We're not going to play with that.
Right.
It's not a game anymore. That's something much more serious. And actually, I have heard, a lot of people say, oh, well, a Ouija board is like, going to channel demonic entities or whatever. And I think it's it's less about the board and more about sort of the people and the circumstances and where the environment. But I have heard other people tell me stories where they have done the board and the planchette has completely flown off the board,
right,
or flown off the table, or, really kind of crazy things like that have happened. So, not really that crazy, but, just that something kind of extreme has, when you remove your fingers, instead of it just stopping, it actually continues moving and will slide off the board. And then of course you're accusing everyone there. Oh, did you move it? Did you push it? I know you threw it. And, everyone denies it, and you just kind of have that. And then there were a few times prior to that I had actually toyed with the Ouija board alone. And I think that can be a really, it can be an interesting experience, but I do think that it can be a very scary experience, because even if you are practicing some form of mentalism and trying to see if you can predictively move the planchette yourself without, with barely touching it, it can really mess with you, because, I think that's what happened. Strange messages started coming, and I don't know where those things were coming from. They certainly weren't your average thought of a 16-year-old girl, even a sort of weird gothic girl. They still weren't really thoughts and phrases that I would have ever heard or would expect someone to say to me. So it was, creepy.
That definitely did sound like a creepy story. And thank you for sharing that. And Michael says thank you as well from Facebook. And there a couple of people in there, Vivian and Gloria, are talking about their Ouija board experiences. It's pretty interesting. Feels like Halloween. It's starting to get there. And matter of fact, today Deb and I and our daughter went to go look for some pumpkins. We went to this local pumpkin patch place, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Suisun Valley area going through the Cordelia corridor.
Mostly I used to take the train through there a lot to get up to Nevada City. When I lived in San Francisco, I would frequently take the train that kind of goes to Suisun City and kind of up through that part of California.
If you go out towards there's a place called Rockville. If you go out towards Rockville and you go out towards the Green Valley area, there's a lot of great scenery. There's wineries out there. There used to be tons of corn crops and orchards and stuff. There is a place out there called Larry's Produce. I'm giving them a free plug. It seems like, but there's a place called
great pumpkins.
It's a cool pumpkin patch. Anyways, I went on Facebook and did a Facebook Live, and I kind of moved the camera around to show it, and crazy pumpkins. I mean, we picked up a white pumpkin of all things.
Oh, I have a white pumpkin on my porch right now.
That's pretty cool.
They're so beautiful.
Yeah, Deb picked it out, and we're gonna do the carvings tomorrow. I picked up one. They have these ones called knuckle-headed pumpkins. I saw that, I'm like, knuckle-headed,
those like warty things.
Yeah, they're really bizarre, and I'm just like, because I'm used to just your regular average pumpkin that you pick up at the grocery store or whatever, and you go out to this pumpkin patch, or actually it's a produce place, and they had like the little miniature train ride, and they had the crop, the corn stalk maze.
Ooh, yeah.
All that stuff. They had. It was really, really cool, and I thought it was pretty neat that when we did that, it's like, okay, now it's starting to feel like Halloween, So because all the stuff that's been going on, before, like, last couple of weeks, we like we were talking about, we had the crazy massive fires going on in Northern California, and then before that, we had the shootings in Las Vegas, and then you had the hurricanes and the earthquakes and the volcanoes, and we're like, what the heck is going on? So to get back into the feel of the holidays, I've always felt Halloween was like one of my favorite holidays. It's starting to feel like that.
It did feel like it came a little like, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Halloween, but even I feel like I got to it a little bit late, just because there were so many things going on, and I was I have many family members and friends that live right in Santa Rosa, and there was just so much kind of just my kind of on the edge of my seat of what is happening. Not only are people having to leave their homes and lose their homes, but there's just this place that I've always loved, and I have a lot of family history there, and realizing that you're helpless. It's going to be gone. So there was just a lot of that kind of. I agree, there was some of that, and then I just busted out the jack-o'-lantern lights, and I felt that I really needed to kind of just do some of that really childlike enthusiasm for Halloween to really kind of snap me out of that, because I typically do that, October 1st, we're if even that, just gather all the things and put them around. And it did feel like it was a little delayed this year. And, that's kind of part of it. I mean, Halloween, we love all of the wonderful reverence of Halloween, and, not to like bring us down too much, but it is also a time traditionally it's a time of remembrance, and it's a time of honoring and speaking with loved ones from the great beyond, and kind of trying to honor them and remember them, and light a candle for them and leave an offering for them. And, the veil is thinner, and even sort of the origins of Halloween go back to being, a time of great darkness, in which it was believed that, spirits could get through, and that the dead could actually come back, which you didn't want. And so you would light these great fires, and you would put fires in these lanterns to sort of keep the bad spirits at bay. And, that's when we dress up so that we can kind of fit in with all the, the witches and the vampires and things kind of fit in with the spirits, and you can go and pass through them without being detected. So there, as much as, there's a great deal of reverence and fun and commercialism that I don't begrudge around our modern day Halloween, it is actually can be a very somber and very sobering time in many ways, especially because, so many of us have lost people who are very important to us. Sure. And we might naturally feel at this time of year a longing for them and a connection to them. And of course we have, Dia de los Muertos, which is all about that. And, cooking the food, the best food for your loved one, and leaving it on a altar and making, their own things, maybe it was their glasses, or going to the graveyard and putting this beautiful temporary exhibit of flowers and sugar skulls, and you just showing great reverence for your loved ones and for the dead. So it is something that kind of naturally lends itself to a time when, the nights are, of course, longer and getting, a little bit, it gets colder. You just things that you kind of associate with death. And that is, at its core, that is what Halloween sort of celebrates.
It's kind of the whole winter deal, if you will, like you were mentioning, the whole symbolism, in my opinion, when it comes to the dark, the nighttime getting darker sooner. It gets darker sooner in this time period. When in spring, you have more of the light is coming in more. So you have things that die. It's a cycle, right? It's a pattern. So you have, all of the symbolism of death during this time, but then, everything's reborn in the spring and in those months.
Yes, and for many sort of pagan traditions, this was actually kind of considered like the new year, that this was sort of the turning point to go into sort of the darkness was at the beginning of the new year, and that you were kind of entering this stage and you were saying goodbye to the dead and to the people that you had lost in the last year, and you were moving forward into the year as the veil, got thicker again, I guess. So it wasn't as easy for spirits and things to pass through.
And I'm not sure if you've written about Samhain, or if you've talked about Samhain in any of your books, or even in your podcast, which we'll get to in a bit. But the tradition of Samhain is it's a Celtic tradition, of course, and the people would light the bonfires and they would wear costumes to ward off ghosts. And that kind of over time it evolved into the Halloween trick-or-treating, and like we were saying, carving jack-o'-lanterns. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like if you were to say it in Gaelic, I think it's pronounced something like Samhain. It's quite different than how we sort of modernly, I think we all think of the band, right? When we see that word, but, it is traditionally a time of, revelry and yet reverence, for sure.
Gotcha. That's really cool. It's great history. We got a cool comment in the Spreaker chat coming from the Fringe, or Joe. He has mentioned, it's called the winter solstice as well. So that's
winter solstice kind of ties in with the dawning of the new light, and that is traditionally sort of closer to Christmas time. And I think actually you and I, Dave, were talking about the overlap. We were talking off air earlier today about kind of the overlap with pagan or like very early holidays and sort of like the modern holidays, or perhaps holidays that are associated with churches. And that it was actually very common for, let's say the Romans were invading and they wanted to take over the Celtic territory. So the smartest thing to do is to have a holiday celebration. You don't outlaw the celebration entirely. You have a holiday celebration around that traditional time, but you do it your way, and you put some elements in it that will attract, the sort of the people who are not of that faith. And then over time, those elements of the original faith get sort of mixed in with that holiday. And you see that with with Day of the Dead. That's a great example, because it's called we call it Halloween, we call it All Hallows Eve and All Souls Day. And so it's kind of become this, if you're a devout Catholic, that would mean something different to you than it would mean to someone who was, just sort of out there celebrating Halloween or celebrating Dia de los Muertos in a more kind of like traditional indigenous sense. So you have sort of key markers in the seasons. And I think, the winter solstice is a great example of another time where you will light bonfires, and there's traditions, all over the world that tie in with that period of time as a transition. And so we think of it kind of more as, we've got all of our kind of more commercial holidays, but there are, most people recognize the solstice. And when the solstice comes, it's on the calendar at least, because it's an increment of, time. It's the longest night of the year. So we know it for that, but it also has a lot of sort of spiritual pagan significance in its beginnings.
Right. Yeah, it's all good. I love Halloween. There's so much history behind it. There's so much symbolism involved, and it's again, with the Dia de los Muertos, it's a time of honoring, right? I mean, it's so cool.
And it's a time of kind of dancing with the spirits. And so, there's the old story of the jack-o'-lantern, and how the jack-o'-lantern was, this guy was basically trying to outsmart the devil. And the way to do that was by carving a little face out of a turnip and putting it in a window to sort of make him think that he was home. And then he ran around out back and disappeared. And so that evolved into the idea that you would carve these little lanterns that would actually help, people were still out harvesting, and so it would be a beacon for them to get home. It was like these lanterns that they would carve out of whatever they had, potatoes and turnips, and, eventually that kind of became squash and gourds, and today we have these glowing jack-o'-lanterns that are synonymous with Halloween. That's kind of probably the first thing most people think of, even if you're just thinking of the movie Halloween. You're going to see that jack-o'-lantern flashing and the 3 more days till Halloween kind of thing come on your screen. So, but I love it. And I do love all the, and I like I said, I'm not begrudging the commercialism. I mean, I like that I can go to Walgreens and get pumpkin socks. I'm not going to lie. It's exciting to me that everything's so readily available, and that I can just get it whenever I want and really kind of keep it going all year round. But yeah, there's just the idea of, dressing up like witches and dressing up like devils and vampires and moving among, who's really behind those masks, and, or the children going out. And then the whole trick or treat thing, right? Where the idea that you might, you might leave a trick, and so you're actually kind of trying to outsmart the devil from keeping him to come in your house, or outsmart these spirits. And so they would play tricks on you, trying to get you to let them in. And then, children now go around and get these treats because they're, supposedly they're doing the nice thing. And that if you're not nice, and at its core, it's an offering, right? It's an offering to the spirits that might otherwise mess with you, because they'll play a trick on you. So the idea, right, with trick or treat is that if you just say trick to the kid, or I don't have any candy, they're going to TP your house, or, write with soap on your windows, or whatever kind of, 1950s trick is going to happen there.
Right.
And then but at its core, you're making an offering to something, to a spirit that you think could potentially, cause you harm. Now, we don't really think of that each day as little, on that night when children come to our door. But at its core, it's this sort of like idea that you're making an offering to sort of appease something. And you see that cross-culturally in many celebrations around this time of, just because we're talking about this time of year, around this time of year, you do see a lot of celebrations that involve lanterns and light, of course, and then also these traditional offerings.
Halloween's awesome. I love it. And, we can go on and on and on, all night. I want to get to what you're doing now with your podcast. And also, I don't want to just limit, talking to you on Halloween and stuff like that. I want to be able to get you, into next year as well, so we can talk about the new book and stuff, when that comes out. So we definitely want to, continue to, keep updated on everything that you do. Your podcast, what can you tell us about that?
So I just launched that at the beginning of October, and it's called Varla Ventura's Tales of the Strange. And it's a total role reversal for me because I'm interviewing other people, which is really fun. And I have done that as an author. I have, always interviewed people and gotten their stories. And now I'm, talking to people. So season 1 is called Strange America. And what we're doing is we're traveling state by state. And we're either gathering the scariest or most unusual or really interesting stories about that place. For example, the first episode is Alabama, and in that one I just kind of talk about some of my favorite haunted stories and haunted cemeteries and things like that are on my bucket list to visit. I co-host it with a man named Bo Llewellyn, who many years ago not many years ago, but 4 or 5 years ago had a podcast called Paranormal Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And he and I was on that show, and we maintained a friendship and kind of communicated over the years, and then we just, kind of brainstormed this idea to do a podcast together. So Strange America, I'm going state by state, and I'm interviewing, it might be paranormal experts. It might be someone who is the curator of a very unusual museum or a collection of, strange oddities, haunted items. I've got a great interview coming up with a documentary filmmaker named Seth Breedlove. Your listeners might know him. He's made several movies, but his kind of thing is Small Town Monsters. That's the name of his production. I don't know if it's his production company, but it's like this series that he's created, and they interview people about the one that I'm talking to him about is the Boggy Creek Monster in Arkansas. But he's also made a movie that just came out about the Mothman. And so he's kind of a documentary filmmaker with a cryptozoological kind of bent. And he's a very interesting person to talk to because he's not necessarily a believer in all of these things, but he does kind of have a really interesting take on it. So the idea, in short, is that I'm just going state by state. And I will say right now, if there's anyone out there that, I know you have listeners from all around the world, but throughout the United States of America, that if you know someone that would be a really good candidate for a specific state, or about an organization or maybe a really well-known kind of well-known but obscure, known to the paranormal community kind of haunted house or location or something like that. We've only been out for a couple of weeks, so we're still in the A's, so we're making our way alphabetically. So if anybody has any suggestions or wants to nominate themselves to, call in with stories or anything like that, you can reach me. Probably the best way to reach me is to just message me through Facebook or something like that. But that's the idea, and we've got some great people lined up, and you can find that podcast all the places pretty much that you can find your podcast and your radio show. we're on iTunes and all of that, and it's just called Varla Ventura's Tales of the Strange. And I will say, I have, I've written a couple of books on this, and so I have, some idea of where I'm going with that. But I do always rely on, there might be someone who says, well, have you ever heard of this guy in Florida, or, this particular place? And so, I always welcome people's ideas and suggestions.
You're not in the Arkansas area right now, are you?
I do not live in Arkansas. No, I live in Minnesota.
Okay. That's what I thought. Joe was asking because he's in Arkansas, and he's like, wanted to know because if you were, he wanted to do a simulcast of that. So that's just something he wanted to throw out there. But yeah, it sounds great. I mean, it really sounds cool. You sound like you have some great guests on there, and the content, of course, paranormal. What more do you want? That's really
the bizarre. It's
the
kind
bizarre.
of an umbrella term, right?
It's really
strange is such a great word because it could mean so many things. But we're gonna probably not talk about politically strange. We're gonna kind of go more the what our fellow weirdos out there like to hear about, and also just it's not always it won't always be just one thing. Like, for example, I just arranged an interview with a wonderful author that is also an archaeologist and not super, super well known to people, but he wrote this amazing story about, or this amazing book about cemeteries. And not only does he know a ton of interesting stuff just historically about cemeteries, but he also has some really cool, weird stories that he's unearthed in the historic record. So that, he was a great interviewer, and he's California. So.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. So a little bit earlier when we were talking, again, it's cool because we have all these great conversations before we do shows, and our conversation wasn't any different. It's always great talking to you, Varla, and so I like being able to to talk a lot about the subject matter. And I was talking to you about mermaids, and there's a lot of symbolism right now with mermaids and sirens and what's happening right now in the world. I mean, you can even go back to a lot of the things that are happening with the hurricanes. Of course, it's affecting bodies of water, that kind of thing. There's a new show called The Siren that's coming out on TV, which I believe Disney is putting out. I don't think it's Disney Channel, but it's one of the channels owned by Disney. Then you have The Little Mermaid, of course. But what we were talking is, first of all, mermaids aren't all cute and innocent like some people think.
Right. So, I have actually noticed, just in terms of sort of like paraphernalia, there seems to be a lot of mermaid paraphernalia everywhere lately. I've seen a lot of those, blankets that make you look like you're a mermaid to cuddle up in. And I know that that's sort of been on the rise. The book that I wrote it was a few years ago when I wrote this book, Among the Mermaids, and it's actually stayed in print the whole time. And it's one of the few times that I've devoted a book only to really just kind of one subject. And it actually did for me start with The Little Mermaid, but it's not The Little Mermaid movie. When I was a kid, remember I had mentioned earlier that, we lived by kerosene lantern light and were reading creepy fairy tales because those were the books that we had. Excuse me. And I think it's an Andersen's fairy tale that has kind of the original Little Mermaid that the movie was based on. And I'll never forget that in that book there are many stories that haunted me as a child and kind of scared me. And the Little Mermaid, I'll never forget sort of the imagery in there of this this mermaid who, she wanted to go on land, and when she would walk on land, it was like daggers were stabbing into her feet and her feet were bleeding. And it was a very, it wasn't really just, okay, I'm going to fight this, sea witch. There was a lot of struggle and a lot of, metaphor to that kind of transformation, that she was trying to make this choice between one world and the other. But to me, I always knew there was sort of like a dark and haunting side to mermaids. And in the book, I really wanted to sort of expose some of those really scarier. I mean, there's plenty of beauty surrounding mermaids, but there's also some scarier descriptions. And I don't want to say a dark side as if, it's a really evil or menacing thing, but mermaids would, in many, many stories, the mermaid is actually out to drown usually the young male protagonist in the story. Mm-hmm. So they have it's not like a lecherousness or it's almost as if it almost seems like an innocent, just a sweet, innocent drowning. Is kind of the impression that you're left with, is like, oh, but oh no, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, wait. Oh no. Get out of the water, get out of the water. So you kind of go on this journey of like, yeah, I would do that too. Oh no, you should never do that. Don't go that close to the water. All these kind of ideas of mermaids that, like, there's this one story that I love where the young man is kind of walking along the seashore, and this is an old Irish story, and he hears this mermaid, and she's sort of weeping and crying out for help. And he looks and he can see the tide has gone out, and she's sort of trapped because, of course, mermaids can't walk, right? So she's sort of trapped in between a rock, and it's kind of a tide pool. And he sees her, and he kind of freezes because he knows this is a supernatural creature, and he really shouldn't mess around. And she she sort of coos to him and begs to him, and says, please, can you please help me get back into the water? If I don't get home on time, if I don't get home in time for supper, my husband, the Mer King or whatever, he'll eat my babies. So I really need your help. And so he, okay, well, you put it that way. So he kind of goes down and he scoops her up, and he's sort of trying to move her just out into the shallow waves. And she just, it's not, can you just bring me a little bit further away? And again, she sort of imports that her children will be eaten if she doesn't get home in time. And so again, he goes a little deeper into the water, and all the while her clutches are, around his neck, her arms are getting just a little bit tighter each time and each time and each time, until they, the waves are starting to crash over them, and he's trying so hard to let go of her, and she's pulling him. And at that point, she sort of just goes manic and is like, just come with me. It'll be fine. We'll have a wonderful life. Just, it's not as bad as you think it will be. And she tries to drown him, and he manages to escape, which is, of course, he lived to tell the tale. And that, he goes off, and he goes home to his wife, and he never again, walks down that stretch of beach, and it becomes this ongoing legend that's told over and over again.
Lucky.
And you just narrowly missed it. So you have a lot of stories that are along those lines of mermaids that are, they're not exactly, like I said, I don't think they're inherently evil, but they certainly have a dark side, and they do understand that you can't breathe beneath the water, but they also understand that if you just do what they say, you can, become part of them. And people occasionally ask me, what do mermaids get out of that? Like, why would they want to do that? And I think it's a little bit like, why do snakes eat rats? It's just like, it's just in their nature. But also on the flip side of that, you do have many examples of sailors speaking of mermaids using their calls and kind of guiding the ship through a rocky area where there wasn't a lighthouse, or there wasn't, guiding them through a storm, or sailors tossed aside in a great storm, and then they say that something rescued them, that a mermaid rescued them. So you do have mermaids, and in other, there's examples of mermaids or mermaid-like creatures in many, many cultures, especially island cultures around the world. And in those cases, you have a sort of dynamic relationship with mermaids and leaving offerings and appreciating the mermaids for what, the protection that they give and the protection that they give fishermen in particular.
Very cool. I know there's a distinction between mermaids and sirens and banshees. Yeah, we'll definitely get into in the next segment. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say that often those terms are used interchangeably, and so it can be, sometimes someone might refer to a mermaid as a siren or a siren as a mermaid, and sirens are depicted in art quite frequently as mermaids, but they're not always mermaids, but they have a lot of very similar characteristics. Cool. And we will definitely get into that some more in the next segment. We are going to take our last break here in a few seconds. And I just want to remind everyone, I am getting your questions and seeing your comments. Everything's wonderful. Like I said, we just have so much material that we can never, of course, cover in one show. So we're doing our best, or I'm doing my best. And Varla, has just been wonderful tonight. She's definitely on fire. And again, I want to thank her for being on the show. So let's go ahead and take our last break. And when we come back, we'll have more stories and questions with Varla Ventura. Don't go away. This is Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturday nights. And I am your host, Dave Cruz. We'll be right back right after this.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday, you can come hang out with me and the other space travelers. We have it all from Carl the Alien bouncing on by to those misfit gnomes causing havoc. It's 3 hours of fun and entertainment on those topics the mainstream really doesn't want to touch. Come get all paranormal with us at spacedoutradio.com, and together, my friends, along with our resident guitar god Bumblefoot, we own the night.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on spacedoutradio.com.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Hi there. I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, We are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Don't have time to listen to Spaced Out Radio Live? Wherever you are, the car, the office, the shower, or even if you're traveling, we're right here for you. Each Spaced Out Radio show can be found on iTunes, TuneIn, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. It's the perfect way for you to catch up on our shows. For more information, just head over to our website, spacedoutradio.com, and tune in to us today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
It's Cosmic Sundays with me, Elizabeth Anglin, in Cosmic Passport. Let me take you down a 3-hour spiritual journey where we will get into everything from ET contact to Psychic Sundays. It's a journey of listening and learning together with some of the best professionals in their fields. You can tune in to Cosmic Passport at spacedoutradio.com every Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guests and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Cruz and SOR.
Welcome back, everyone. Having a blast tonight. Varla's been awesome. I want to remind everybody that tomorrow night, Elizabeth Anglin has the Psychic Sundays on Spaced Out Sundays Cosmic Passport starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. You can also listen to me, Dave Cruz, as I host Beyond the Strange Radio Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Go to spacedoutradio.com/paranormal and click on the Beyond the Strange button for links and info to the show. We want to welcome everyone listening in on WQEE 99 Rock the Key down in Noonan, Georgia, home of The Walking Dead. We are also live on the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. And we are live on TalkStream Live, iHeartRadio, and KTLK, thefringe.fm as well. Find us on TuneIn and iTunes for download. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. Head on over to the website for some great features, such as videos from UFO seekers and Contact TV. Shop at our store and pick up t-shirts, posters, and stickers. And don't forget to rock out to our resident guitar god, Ron Bumblefoot THAL, who is the official music of the mighty SOR. And one more time, I just want to welcome our guest tonight, author, podcaster, and everything bizarre, Miss Varla Ventura. Thanks again, Varla, for being on the show tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I was just saying, I can't believe that 2 hours have already gone by, and
it's
thank
ridiculous.
You for everyone who's listening, and you know, you have such an active audience. It's great.
Oh yes, they are wonderful. The
Night owls.
The space travelers are awesome. I do have to admit, wonderful bunch of good humans, or some maybe not humans. You never know.
Yeah. Hey, we're fans of the supernatural. We don't discriminate.
Absolutely. And you know what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to jump right back into the questions for you.
Okay.
And Gloria in Facebook would like to ask you, with all the craziness that's happened this year, does Varla think sightings of the so-called winged humanoids may have had anything to do with the loosed evil? Quite possibly Mothman. I know Mothman's like a harbinger of doom.
Yeah, so Mothman's an odd one, because Mothman sort of speaks to the idea that there was some sort of government experiment that created something, or the government knew about it and was containing it, or it sprang out of some sort of toxic chemical we still don't know, you know. So right. There's kind of that idea. I mean, one thing that I notice, and because of the sort of nature of my books and the kind of audience that is interested in this kind of material, is often very interested in cryptids and other kind of, you know, strange and bizarre creatures, and also UFOs and things of that nature. I have found, especially with the last book, as I was really digging around, and there was so much material that I just couldn't include in, you know, in the book, but in particular, there was this massive volume of work by a man named William Wirt Sykes, and he's a British or a Welsh author. And he wrote this thing called British Goblins. And in it, he just talks about a lot of different creatures, and he just gets into all kinds of folklore and mythology and corpse candles and crossroads and goblins and fairies and brownies. And it's really amazing. But one of the things that struck me repeatedly, especially with some of the descriptions and even a few of the little kind of sketched illustrations in there, is that so often, and I saw this a few times, some of the things that would be equated with, like, let's say you have like a brownie in your house, and a brownie is like a small little, you know, maybe like knee-high sort of domesticated fairy kind of impish creature. Looks a little bit more like, most people would be familiar with Dobby from the Harry Potter books, and of course in the movies, he's sort of this little kind of elfin guy. Right. And a Dobby or a Dobie is actually the equivalent of a brownie or a hobgoblin. I think it's the Scottish equivalent of a hobgoblin. And a hobgoblin and a brownie, these are sort of domestic fairies, little elfy guys that live either in your home or in, you know, your barn or your garage, and they tend to things. So they kind of, and I'm getting to the answer to the question, actually, believe it or not. I know it sounds like I'm going off in another direction, but they tend to things in the house, and sometimes if you don't leave them the offering that you should leave them, you don't give them the nice food, and you don't do your part of the work, they'll do things like steal items or move items around or occasionally scratch or pinch you. Not all of them, but and so this to me sounds so much like some sort of, poltergeist stories I've heard where things have gone missing and items are moving around the room. And then, a kid wakes up with scratches on their arm or something like that. So my point is that so many of these very, very old, I'm drawing on written material from the, anything between the 18th to the 21st century. And that's drawing on years and years, and in some cases earlier, but years and years of oral traditions about creatures and beings and sightings of things that seem to be so similar to something like a dog man or a UFO or an alien encounter or an alien abduction. Alien abductions and fairy abductions are so similar. There's a lack of concept of how long you've been gone. You might come back and it's like you think a few hours have gone by and it's actually been weeks, and you feel drained and you're left sort of, naked and starving in the woods. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm not saying that UFO encounters don't happen. I'm not passing a judgment on that, but I did notice so many parallels where we have different words for things. So in answer to that question, I don't know that things have been unleashed, but perhaps people are able to see more because they are, they're looking harder for the signs. Maybe our own desperation as people is driving us to understand that there's things we don't understand, and so there are more sightings of these kind of things. I don't think it's a great, winged humanoid conspiracy, but I do think that there's a certain consciousness that comes with becoming aware of what a fragile world we live in.
I really like that answer, Varla, because that's a very refreshing answer. I don't think I've ever heard that that kind of response when someone has talked about the Mothman or a flying humanoid type of omen, if you will. It goes all the way back down to our psyche and what we interpret it as. I think you got it right on the nail, right on the head.
Well, and then there's the thing is that, if you think about people who can see fairies or can see ghosts or kind of communicate with spirits, especially can see fairies, in Ireland, you say that it's the second sight. And I think we've probably heard that term before. Well, so you have the second sight, or what we call the sixth sense. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that not everyone can see these things, and not everyone can, lots of people are very interested in the supernatural and paranormal and do not have an actual experience themselves, or it takes some time for them to have an experience. And that doesn't make them, it doesn't make it any, more or less valid, but some people are gifted with the ability to communicate and see things and hear things that other people can spend a lifetime seeking and never be able to do that. And so the idea that, our encounters with these things are not necessarily something to be feared, although, there are some scary, scary stories out there, but it's not always something to be feared. It's just that we fear the unknown. And so, you can overlay that with a lot of fear of the unknown that we have in our modern everyday society. We fear religions we don't understand. We fear people that we can't understand their language. I mean, we fear a lot of the unknown, and people have always kind of feared the unknown. And some people have the gift to be able to see beyond that. So I think, the second sight is a gift, and just, the ability to have a paranormal experience is really something that people should look on with a little bit more like, hey, yeah, that's really cool that I was able to see that, and be a little less, is there something wrong with me? Am I crazy? My friends are going to think I'm crazy when I talk about, I think I saw a mermaid, and a little more just like, okay, open to the possibility. When you're open to the possibility of mermaids existing, you're also open to the possibility of other things coming into your life, positive things, good change, creative energy. All kinds of things happen when you start to kind of like just suspend your doubt for, 10 minutes a day or something.
Exactly. Right. And, I'd love to see anything paranormal except for a doppelganger. And we can get into that later. if you have anything on doppelgangers, I'm sure you do. But I've been hanging on to a question, and this comes from Deb, of all people. Can vampires and humans have relationships? And she mentions friendships, of course.
Well, I have vampire friends. I think we have the supernatural vampire of legend and lore, and we have the living vampire, which are people who accept sort of the lineage and tradition of the folklore and the romanticism of vampires and practice in their daily lives, either through psychic arts or, other kind of intimate practices that involve things that, it doesn't always involve blood, but blood is very symbolic, and it could involve blood or bloodletting. It usually is it's a very energetic thing. So most, not all, but many, many vampires who are awakened and recognize themselves as vampires stay within a more closed vampire community and find people within that community to give them energy. Many of us probably know, you probably are familiar with the idea of like an energy vampire or a psychic vampire, where you talk to someone and you just feel like they have just drained you of any energy. You just can't even answer them. They're just so, they just need a lot from you. And I think that, a good responsible vampire might say that that's an unawakened vampire, or a person who is unaware of that need. An awakened vampire knows they're like that, but basically, makes accommodations in their life to not impact people who are non-vampires. And I'd say I have 3 or 4 friends who identify as vampires in varying degrees. I myself do not identify as a vampire, but I recognize the desire to, or the sort of the lifestyle and the beauty of it. I mean, there are many people who sort of look at vampirism in the way that, some people look at Wicca or practice it in sort of a magical sense. Not all Wiccans are witches and not all witches are Wiccans, right? So we have kind of different definitions of things. But I personally have vampire friends, and I'm not one, so I guess we can coexist. So far, so good.
So far, so good. That's a good answer. That's a good answer, and I really appreciate you answering that. Dennis in the Spreaker chat wants to ask, and this goes back to us talking about Halloween and all the different symbolism and creatures of the night. He wants to know where did the pointy hats come from? I think he's referring to the witches.
Oh, like a witch's pointy hat. So, I mean, there's a lot of theories about where the witch's pointy hat came from. But the general, I have a couple of theories myself, but the general idea is that during especially, the period of time, the witch craze, we'll call it, right? And the medieval kind of, whatever, the 1600s, when people were accused of witches, and there was a sort of a period of time when there were massive witch hangings, but there was a very long period of time, and there continued to be after that times when someone would be accused of a witch, they would blame the crop spoiling or the baby dying or whatever it was, would be blamed on witches. Mm-hmm. And the church would not allow anything that had points into the church. I mean, of course, you had to take your hat off, but you couldn't wear stag horns, of course, which, pagans did have sort of stag horns, where there were the ideas that you might have something you couldn't have anything pointy or phallic in the church. It was thought to be part of the devil. And so I do think that the idea that a witch wears something that looks like the head, 2 horns of the devil coming together, I do think that there's a lot of credence to that argument, that basically it was banned and witches were banned, and so the church kind of advocated that. Although you will see sort of conical shaped hats in many depictions from different cultures. Other people think that it might be it was sort of made to make witches look like a joke. So it was like a dunce cap because they wanted to say, oh, you're just an idiot old lady and you don't know anything, and you don't know anything about modern medicine. You don't know anything about what's, really happening, and you don't know how to use leeches. You just use herbs. So you're obviously an idiot and you should just wear this hat and we'll brand you a witch. So there's some evidence to suggest that it's kind of more along those lines. And I think it's probably a little bit of all of those things.
Sure, right.
And I also think that there's always been something very magical about the triangle. We see that in the Mother, Maiden, and the Crone. We see that in the Holy Trinity. We see that in the Pyramid. We see a lot of, the three sides coming together. And so I do think that the association with that in alchemy and magic, and the triangle itself being something very symbolic. You can see early paintings and depictions of people with power, like the wise men or the witches or the council, having a sort of triangular hat because it was thought to sort of be a conduit to the gods or goddesses. So that's my theory. I mean, there's also some modern paintings and things like that made it really popular. And of course, The Wizard of Oz, it became extremely popular to have that classic kind of witch hat. But those are some of my theories on how we came to the pointiest hat of today.
Right. No, that's a very thorough explanation, I would think. And I don't think I'd ever ask that question if it didn't come from a Spreaker chat or any chat. So thanks again, everyone, for the wonderful questions. And Varla, thank you for answering them. Daryl wants to know, what do fairies do when they abduct you?
So the accounts of fairies abducting, and I had said earlier that there's the changeling, which is sort of a fairy switch, where they'll take a human and they'll raise a human and they'll leave a fairy child in its place. But occasionally it does happen that a grown adult will become accepted into the fairy kingdom or taken into the fairy kingdom. There are ways that basically there are things you're not supposed to do, like fall asleep in a fairy mound in the forest, which is an area where there's a circle either of stones or mushrooms or some kind of mound that looks like it might have a doorway. If they take you, there's usually you're basically left with the impression that you're at a great party, and you spend hours dancing and everything looks very beautiful and shimmery, and it's just like when you go to a party at the beginning of the night and everything's enchanting and everyone's having a great time, and then as the party wears on, you can kind of see the bags under people's eyes. And so as you're there and you're kind of in the middle of all this revelry and you're all enchanted, you kind of start to see a few leers, a few sneers, a few kind of glares and strange behavior. And then if you're lucky enough, because you didn't eat or drink anything at the party, you're sort of let go. And at that point, you wake up as if you've been in some kind of dream, and you wake up and you're usually, starving. And it could be, you have that story of Rip Van Winkle. It's kind of that idea that you could fall asleep for 100 years, but it's usually just something like maybe a few months at the most, or a week where, someone kept looking for their friend that was lost in the woods and they can't find them. And then they come wandering back into camp eventually, and they just look like they've been partying for a week with the fairies and not in a good way. So that's my understanding. I have not ever been to the fairy realm myself. So I that's pure speculation based on the folkloric record.
Right. Now that it sounds like a party. Maybe.
Yeah, there's a certain appeal to it, but I do have kind of a section in my book where it's kind of like, how to get to the fairy kingdom or what gets you into the fairy kingdom and how not to go there, because most of the time they're kind of you've been cautioned not to do it. Most people would would once you read the stories, it's usually not a good, never really goes well for you. However, there are some instances in which someone has had an encounter, maybe gone to fairyland or had an encounter with a fairy or even a kind of banshee-like creature, and as a result, when they return to the land of, mortal man, they are then able to see. So they're almost like gifted with an additional second sight. I guess that wouldn't be a second sight, right? It'd be like a third or a fourth sight. But the ability to, pick out fairy people that might otherwise look just like regular people to everyone else. Once you've gone, if you come back and you survive, you're actually able to identify fairies in their various forms and disguises.
Okay. That's cool. And yeah, thank you, by the way, for going back over brownie, what a brownie is, because I'm serious.
It sounds like a yummy treat.
It does. I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I gotta ask, and so it was pretty interesting because it was almost like you read my mind.
Oh yeah, well, what's a brownie? Well, I mean, it does sound like a yummy treat, and there are many kind of little guys like that sound. They have different names, but they have very similar behavior, and there's examples of these kind of helper fairies in Italy and in Spain and throughout the world, really. In Mexico, there's the duende, which kind of crossover in that sort of hobgoblin-y, elfy world, and you have a lot of spirits that can be kind of helping spirits. And this again, I think, goes back a little bit to the idea of leaving an offering, and these sort of very early people from around the world lived in harmony because they made certain accommodations for things that they could not explain or understand, or maybe not understand, but they respected. So you would leave an offering to whether it was a god or a goddess, or it was a little creature or a little person or whatever kind of little creature out there, whatever you believed. There's examples of people leaving, offerings and burying their dead with, things for the passage and things of that nature. And so a lot of these fairy stories do kind of come back to like, if, you just kind of do your part and, you're not lazy and you leave a nice treat out. We have Santa's a great example of that too. The idea of leaving Santa milk and cookies, that's a little like, he's a magic elf that would bring these magical things if you leave him a little treat. And that would, that happened throughout Scandinavia. You still find these little sort of red hooded little guys that you put around in your windows and stuff around Christmas time. The little, I think they're called, I want to call them Nises, but I could be saying that wrong. And they're just these sort of little kind of gnome-like creatures, the red-capped little gnomes, and they protect your house and bring good luck in the new year as the solstice comes and you're kind of fading toward the new season of light and things like that. So there's a lot of that kind of basic offering happening.
Okay, and I'm not sure if this was a serious question.
Oh, good.
I know you never can tell, but I think it is a serious question. Hopefully, you can answer it. Do you have any idea how the Bobbing for Apples game started?
Oh, that's cute. So I do know that apples were, have always been associated like with the goddess Aphrodite and with love in general. And apple wood is thought to, you would use apple wood in a spell if you wanted to make someone kind of love you. You would make a sort of a wand out of that, or you would bind something up with the fibers that you've extracted from the bark of the wood. So I think that the Bobbing for Apples actually was like a party game. I mean, it is a party game still, but it was a party game that I mean, almost like spin the bottle or something, where people would just try, like you would try and bite at it, and then if somebody else was able to bite the same apple, then you were, betrothed. And also with apples, you have like the idea that there, you shine the apple and then you spin. I mean, how many people do that thing where you say the alphabet as you're turning the stem, and then whatever it lands on, like that's who you're going to marry, someone whose name starts with H or whatever. And I know I always do that, and it's sort of like a spirit thing, and I think that people have that real association with apples as being sort of a magical, the golden apple, this sort of special thing. But I think bobbing for apples came from the idea of, seeing who else would bite the same apple as you. And let's not overlook the sort of more obvious fact that this time of year is like apple season. And in many, many parts of the United States and Europe and, other parts of North America, apples are in great abundance right now. It's apple season. It's harvest time. So it might have also just been, it's like, what floats in water? What can we do with all of these apples? Let's chuck them against the wall. Oh, I know. Let's try and catch them with our mouths. But I do think there's a little kind of kissing element to the bobbing for apples.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Two people underwater and kissing and drowning at the same time. Nah, just kidding.
Oh, yeah. Right. Connection to mermaids. We got it full circle.
There you go.
Bringing bobbing apples right in.
I knew there was a connection. Yeah, that's all good. And, man, that's awesome that, you knew, something about that right away. And I'm like, I was just like, I'm just going to throw it out there and see if Varla knows anything about
I
it.
actually
that's really cool.
I have been doing a little bit of party planning myself for Halloween night, and we were kind of just talking about what sort of old-fashioned games that we could play, and what were some kind of witchy things that we could do that anyone could do, and we were kind of talking about bobbing for apples and things like that. And yeah, I mean, I don't really know if that's entirely true, but that's the impression that I've always gotten. And I kind of feel like there was a point at which I went to a party and someone didn't have the apples in a bin. They had them hanging from a tree, and you would get, it was a little bit more like a piñata kind of thing where you'd get blindfolded and you'd be spun around, and then you kind of stumbled up to this spot. And I was, probably in my early 20s, and you'd spin around, and then you kind of get pushed toward the spot, and then you just bite in the air, and you get, 3 minutes to do it. And if you bite an apple, then you get a prize, you get a shot or something. I don't know. You can drink. And then if somebody else bit the same apple, then that was supposed to be kind of, oh, okay, you're supposed to pair off with that person. Or, wild Halloween parties, things, anything goes.
Anything goes. That's for sure. I love Halloween parties. I think they're pretty bomb. And I'm so looking forward to Halloween night and all the activities too that go with it. Some places have something that's called trunk or treat. Have you ever heard of that?
Trunk or treat, yeah, where people circle around in their vehicles and they kind of trick or treat out of people's trunks. And yeah, I mean, I've never been to one. I think that it's often done as a way for kids to be able to trick or treat like in a controlled environment and sort of a safe environment. Because
mainly churches kind of do that.
Churches or just community groups, because you just don't necessarily, you want your kids to be able to trick or treat, but you don't necessarily just want to turn them loose on the streets for good reason.
Right.
Not only the fact that they're going to eat all the candy in their bucket. I mean, that's not the main reason. But yeah, I have heard of those. I think it's cute.
Yeah, I think it's kind of neat. And interestingly enough, today, among some of the other activities we were, looking for Halloween, like pumpkin carving and all that stuff, we kind of kicked off the TV season on Netflix for the Stranger Things season 2.
Oh yeah.
And we watched the first two episodes. Oh man, I'm telling you, I put Stranger Things all the way up there with The Walking Dead, which is, like one of my, favorite shows to watch. And
I love The Walking Dead.
Isn't that awesome? That reminds me, I do have a zombie question for you. And, Game of Thrones, just some of the best programming, in my opinion, that's come, it's been a long time. TV has come out with anything, decent. And I think Stranger Things is way up there. It might even be at the top right now. Past Walking Dead. It's that good. I don't know if people would agree with me on that or not, but it's my opinion. That's all I can say.
It's your show. You can say what you want.
It's my show, right? Well, it's not really my show.
That's such a nice kind of retro throwback. I thought it reminded me of. Again, I'll be dating myself here, but when, in the 80s, there was I think it was Steven Spielberg, and it was like Amazing Stories.
Yes.
Now, if anybody remembers, this show was on like prime time. It didn't have a real long run, but it was kind of not necessarily supernatural things, but kind of incredulous, unexplainable things that were happening. And I can't remember if it was all in one town where it was based. I think it was. And, these things would happen. It would usually be the kids that it would happen to. And the first time I saw an episode of that show, which I have not seen all of them, but, it's getting to be winter here soon. So I'm sure I'll be catching up on some,
there you go.
Middle of the night binge watching.
Right.
But once I get through binge listening to all of the scary stories in Jim Harold's archives there, I'll take that up. But yeah, it really reminded me of that kind of retro 1980s, like supernatural TV kind of thing, which obviously I resonate toward.
Yeah, it's really cool because they're introducing some of those 80 stars, from the 80s, like Sean Astin, he's in this season on the Stranger Things, and also Paul Reiser.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, funny.
Man, it's not that he looks bad. I mean, you can tell he's aging. He is aging well, but he put on a lot of weight. I mean, I'm just like, I know it's like he walks in, he plays a doctor, right? And he just walks in and you're just like, damn, that's Paul Reiser. Cause he's always been a real thin guy, and it's just like, whoa, yeah, it was just a trip, but no, it's a great 2 episodes to start off the new season, and I'm looking forward to watching the rest of it. And yeah, so zombies. What can you tell us about the good old zombies?
I mean, I won't bother trying to, get into any of the more commonly known things that we think of with zombies and the sort of undead. And zombies are, I haven't written a great deal about zombies, although I probably, I would love to write a book just about zombies, zombie lore, zombie magic, zombie plants, zombie behavior in the natural world, of which there are a few instances. For example, I think it's a fly that lays its eggs in the head, in the abdomen of an ant. And then when its eggs hatch, they move their way inside the abdomen up into the brain of the ant and eat its brain and then control its body.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
I know. Right? No, yeah, I am. I'm totally serious. In fact, I believe at Texas A&M University, they have been doing biological tests with these kind of flies that can lay these eggs because they want to eliminate the fire ants, which are a huge problem in the South. And if you've ever stepped on a fire ant nest or, walked off of a sidewalk in the wrong place that hasn't been bombed for fire ants, you'll find that you're quickly surrounded by little red ants that are biting the heck out of your skin. And so, I mean, I think it's like an attempt to not have to use heavy chemicals, but then you sort of have this element of like something creepy. And you do have a bit of that in The Walking Dead, right? Not a bit of it, but like the idea that there was something that the government slipped up with that created this disease that caused people to like come back after they were dead. But there's a lot of, I think you might associate zombies and sort of there's some association with like Haiti and voodoo or Voodoo culture, and they do believe in zombies, and it's sort of the idea that that the dead can come back. Now, some of that has some medical origins of people being, goes into like premature burial and things like that. Mm-hmm. But there are ideas that people can come back, or that they can suffer, what might look like death, for example, a debilitating stroke or something like that. And then they sort of shamble along, right? Because they don't quite have the feeling back in their limbs, and they were thought to be dead, and they're kind of, then they're feared. But there are a lot of, there's a huge culture around the idea of zombies and belief in zombies, and careful practices to sort of bury people in a way in which they can't get back out of their graves. But I think that a lot of the zombie stories that kind of have evolved today do come from our lack of understanding when people are actually dead. And I actually have quite a few stories about, and I don't even think we have the time tonight to get into these, but I wrote about it a bit in the very first book of the Bizzare, because it was something that I was interested in, and that is the idea of like premature burial and the fear of being buried alive. And these kind of stories of like corpses sort of like springing back to life and then going on to have, a lovely rest of their life. But I will tell you one quick story along those lines. It's an old Scottish story, and it's about Half-Hanged Maggie. And Half-Hanged Maggie was hung because she had an abortion. So she was, she was tried and convicted of terrible sin and hung. And she was sort of from a poorer class. So her family gathers her body and, was going to take it back to the family burial plot, which is up a hill and around the corner to the village. And they lay her body out in this wagon, and they're pushing her back up the hill, and they stop at the tavern, at the pub, and they have a drink in honor of Half-Hanged Maggie. Well, Maggie wakes up. Well, they were just calling her Maggie at that point. She wasn't half-hanged yet. Right. So Maggie wakes up, and she doesn't understand what's going on, and she's just, somebody's passing by right then, and they see this woman who seems very out of it, and they realize that she's not well, and they kind of get the intention, and then the family members come out, and they take care of her and rejoice, and they bring her home, and she goes on to live. At this point, she was probably a 20-year-old woman. She goes on to live to be a fairly old woman. I think she dies in her 50s or 60s, and she has many children. And I mean, fairly old for the 1800s or whatever when this happened. And so she goes on to live this long, prosperous life, but everybody refers to her as Half-Hanged Maggie because she was only half-hanged.
That's awesome. Is this one of your favorite stories, by the way?
I do love the story of Half-Hanged Maggie, and I actually first heard it or a variation of it in a pub in Scotland. So that makes it more dear to my heart. And then somebody said, "Oh, we've got to go down to this bookshop, and there's a wonderful collection of sort of local ghost stories and lore." And I found a couple of books during that trip, and this was many years ago. And that was kind of one of the ones that I had heard told, and then I flipped to it and, read all the details that the author had put down. And, it's kind of one of those stories that's repeated and told around, a good pint. And so, yeah, that's always one of my favorite stories. She was avenged.
There you go. That's right. We've asked you what was one of your scariest stories. but and you know, the story you just shared sounds like one of your favorites. What is your most favorite story?
My most favorite story. Well, there's a few stories that from each book that I always, you know, I mean, I put my favorite stories in the books whenever possible.
15 minutes.
So one story that I'll just tell, that I will encourage people to read, and I will not tell you all the details of the story, is an old vampire story that was first published in French. The author's name is Théophile Gautier. Terrible. I never took French. That's probably not at all how you say it. And he wrote this story. It was called La Motte Amoureuse, or Clairemont. When it was published in English, it was published as Clairemont. And this is a vampire story that involves a priest. And I'll just set the scene for you. He is down on his knees, and he is about to just like enter into the priesthood for the rest of his life. And just at that moment when he's about to just say the words, this woman breezes into the church, and she's the most beautiful and haunting woman he's ever seen in his life, with alabaster skin and wild dark hair. And he becomes somewhat obsessed with her. She falls ill. He becomes even more obsessed with her, and it goes down a very dark and somewhat, I don't even want to say because it'll give it away, but there is just a tinge of necrophilia in there for you. So it's a really interesting story.
Okay.
Okay. Well, you know, it's late.
Getting back to zombies.
So we can
just kidding.
Yeah, get right into that. Right. They don't really get into that in The Walking Dead. So that's one of my favorite stories that I highly recommend people read or look up, or, you know, it's in my vampire book, and it's also available in other places like big collections of, you know, 100 best vampire stories. So that's one of my favorite vampire stories. But one of my favorite stories of all the stories I've ever read is actually a leprechaun story. And it's a delightful story. It's not really that scary, but it's a little bit funny. And I was quite surprised by what I learned about leprechauns in writing this fairy book. Leprechauns, I had sort of the basics that most people have about leprechauns, the gold and the Irish origins. But what I didn't realize is that, you know, leprechauns originally were not depicted in green, that became an association when leprechauns kind of became almost a derogatory image of a early, you know, late 1800s, early 1900 kind of like Irish immigrant who wore a bowler hat and had a certain style to him. So the thing we think of as a leprechaun with the big belt and the shoes and all of that is a little bit of a derivation of what a man would have worn during that period of time. Leprechauns actually used to be known to be wearing red and wore red caps, much like the little red cap and other kind of little elfin creatures that we know about. And in this one story, and then of course leprechauns, you know, they have that golden store. They're cobblers, so they're actually the cobbler of the fairy kingdom, and you can find them not by following the rainbow, but by listening carefully for the tap, tap, tap of their cobbler's bench. And if you happen upon a leprechaun, you should not demand their giant pot of gold, but you should ask for their purse, their magic purse, because they have on them a magic purse that never runs out of gold. And one of my favorite stories involves a man who captures a leprechaun, kind of ties him up and pokes him a lot and isn't particularly nice to him, and demands this purse. And so the leprechaun gives it to him. And he says, now you have to know there's only ever one gold coin in there. It's endless, but there's only ever one gold coin. And so the man's very excited, and he lets the leprechaun go, and he sends him, you know, he goes, you know, dancing down to the pub, and he sits down and he, you know, orders, you know, drinks on me, everything's on me. And when everybody's celebrating and they think, oh, he finally caught a leprechaun, oh, he's got his golden store, and it's all great and exciting. And then he goes to pay, and he puts the purse on the counter, and he very, you know, ceremoniously pulls out the golden coin and sets it down. And, you know, the innkeep just kind of looks at him like, and, you know, you need about 100 more of those. And he reaches back in, you know, as if to show her, and he reaches in, and the purse is empty. And so the leprechaun, it's not that there wasn't a magic purse. The leprechaun gave him the wrong magic purse. And so then he has to go and scrub pots or something like that and becomes the laughing stock of the village. And I just love that story. I just thought it was so funny and such a kind of classic twist on what we think of as like, chasing down this leprechaun at the end of the rainbow, and he's going to grant you 3 wishes or whatever like that, but much more along the lines of leprechauns being tricksters and playing tricks. Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. And let's not forget the trickery of trick or treat, right? You've got to make accommodations for a little bit of that trickster fairy or that trickster element.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Michael had a question in Facebook. I kind of mentioned to him, you might want to contact Varla because we're coming to the end of the show, and I really wanted to hear. I know it's crazy, right? It just flew by. We're coming to the end of the show, and I wanted you to be able to share your favorite stories and writings that you've come across since you've been doing this, and so I kind of mentioned, well, you might want to go ahead and contact Varla through Facebook. I mean, I guess I can ask it. Let me see if I can find it. Everyone's in Facebook was like, "Oh my gosh, it's almost over! Dang it!" Yeah, I know it's crazy.
Yeah, the time we're on fairy time here, people. We're like suspended for a bit because if no time went by, and then at the end of this, you're going to feel really tired.
Right? Oh no, they'll be fine. Okay, so we'll see if we can get this answered in the next
6 minutes? 4.5 minutes?
I was gonna say 4 minutes. 4.5.
My answers are so long always. Okay, I'll try and I'll focus.
Well, okay, we'll see if I can. I'll see if I am not the best reader, by the way. So yeah, I'm notorious for that. Okay, Michael wants to know. First, he says, I used to have an antique store back in the early 1990s. One afternoon, about 4 p.m., a woman walked into the store, walked around looking at things, then walked up the stairs, looked around up there. She came back down the stairs, looked around a bit more, and left. About 10 or 15 minutes later, I was still behind the counter working. No one else had come in the store. I heard someone going upstairs. I looked up, and it was the woman who had left a few minutes earlier. I went upstairs, and there was no one up there. Does Varla have any explanation for something like that?
Well, I mean, the only thing that kind of immediately sprang to mind besides, ghost or whatever, is that the mention that it was an antique store. And I've actually been kind of talking to a couple people about museums of haunted items, or there are people who will collect things that no one else can stand to have around because of these kind of energy or some sort of entity that's associated with these items. And so, to me, that just sort of sounds like you got a little glitch of like a ghost on repeat there. But I just heard a story earlier tonight, actually, about this terrifying story about this painting that someone had picked up at a yard sale of this image of this woman. And they later saw that woman in their house. So I think there's, kind of reminding me a little bit of that, of the idea that there's haunted places and there's haunted things. And there might also just be these moments when we just kind of get this glimpse into like something that's on replay and we only see it. I don't know, maybe there was something in particular that person was looking for. Whenever I have a paranormal experience like that, and I certainly don't have them as frequently as some people do, but whenever I do, it takes me a little while, but I do try and kind of think like, what did I need to know at that point? Did I just need to be reminded that I don't know things? Did I need to be reminded that, I should call this older woman that I've been meaning to talk to because I keep seeing this apparition? I kind of try and look at it a little bit like that. Like maybe there's a message there, but sometimes you're just in the like haunted spot at the, haunted time. And you know this, Dave, because you've done investigations. You can go on an investigation and get nothing. And you could walk into a place, that same place, you won't get anything on tape. but or on, EVP or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then but you go there, at the right witching hour alone or with the right people. And that's why I can't stand those ghost shows where they go around and yell at the ghost, like, talk to me right now, and things like that, because it just seems like, I mean, if I were a ghost, I would just chuck something at your head. And if I didn't have the ability to do that, I would leave, because I would never I would never respond to someone who yelled at me. So I always kind of, dislike when I hear people trying to communicate in a sort of a disrespectful way, because I think, if there's something there and you want to get that message, it just doesn't always come in the form you're expecting it to. Yeah,
I wouldn't. I mean, that's
right?
Just downright rude. So, if you're going to, come in and, wake me up from my eternal sleep, I'm going to be a little pissed. So I totally understand where these, ghosts are coming from. Varla, it's the end. I cannot believe this.
Amazing.
It is just ridiculous.
And we are one more day closer to Halloween.
Yes.
So that's, depending on what time zone you're in, you might already be there.
Almost.
We've only got a couple more days left here.
Almost. Well, I would love for you to let the audience know where they can find you and everything that's you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that reminder, too, because I often, forget to do those basic things like give you my website. My website is varlaventura.net. So it's my name.net. And there you can find information about the books that I've written, links to the podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast. If you type my name into iTunes or whatever, it comes, whatever you use to listen, it comes up there. And the podcast is called Tales of the Strange. This season is Strange America. And, I've got a Facebook page and all that kind of stuff. And my books are all, my last few books anyway, are all in print and widely available. You can find them basically wherever books are sold. If your bookstore doesn't have them, they can order them, and they're available widely online in all of the major places. So, again, I will say, if you get the chance, especially with the fairy book, pick it up and look at the spine. There's a little magic guy on the spine that Jim put there for me, and just appreciate his handiwork for a moment.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, as a matter of fact. And
so cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even know about that. I just had seen the cover. I had no idea. And when I finally got the book, when the first batch came, there was this magical little red cap fairy on the spine, and you just don't really see images on the spine that often. So it was a lovely thing.
Pretty awesome.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was great. I can't believe I blathered my way through 3 hours here.
Never blather.
Thank you for your patience and your wonderful questions and your audience, and happy Halloween to everyone.
Happy Halloween to you too, Varla. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely talk some more off the air very soon.
Sounds great.
You have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Amazing, everyone. I cannot believe how freaking fast time goes by when you're having fun. Once again, remember tomorrow to tune into Elizabeth Anglin's Psychic Sundays on Spaced Out Radio's Cosmic Passport, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, and Spaced Out Radio at spacedoutradio.com. You can listen to me, Dave Cruz, as I host Beyond the Strange Radio Sunday nights, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Next week, you don't want to miss it, we will be speaking with Alex Mastretta, the one and only. So tune in for that. And remember, everyone, have a great night. Have a happy Halloween. Asta.
When the clocks, they never stop, they barricade my face. When the clocks keep building up, they suffocate my brain. I built them to destroy myself. They're circling the prey. I petrified hearts and I'm lost inside. We all self-destruct to love this to be and that is life. And the clocks, they never stop, they tap beneath my skin. And the clocks keep building up